Hello, Mr. Steinecker coming to you from my very messy home office with all the pictures in the background. So today we are going to be talking about using quotes with more excellency in our writing. I mean, all of you have shared quotes before, but there's a really good format for doing this that we call the I.C.E. or I.C.E. format. So we're going to practice that today, and we'll have an assignment that's at the end that's graded that will be super easy after you see this video. Okay, so here we have got some classic quotes from classic movies. It's important to quote things correctly. Use the Force, Harry. Gandalf said that, didn't he? Find Potter and bring him to Narnia. The Death Star is ready for our war against the Time Lords. I am Groot. Perfect, right? Those quotes are perfect. Yeah, no, they're not, right? It's very important to quote things correctly. And there are actually certain rules that we can use when we are quoting things from books, from websites, etc., to help people see that it's a quote and know where the quote comes from and just make it a really fluid and easy reading experience. So today I'm going to use this fancy tablet that my sister recommended to me, and we're going to see if I can write while we're doing this presentation. Now, when you see a quote like this that's done well, my question for you would be, what are some parts of a good quote? In this case, we have a paragraph, and I'll go ahead and read it really quick. And I want you to ask yourself, what are some things that this quote is doing well? Why did Elie Wiesel write night? One reason could be to help stop something like the Holocaust from happening again. Mr. Wiesel once said, I have tried to keep memory alive. I have tried to fight those who would forget. By calling what he does a fight, Wiesel could mean that many people want to just forget the Holocaust. It can feel like fighting to speak up about what happened. But it is important to keep talking about this sad history so that we do not ever repeat it. So my question for you is, what are some basic rules of giving a quote? What do we do well when we give a quote? Take a sec, you tell me. So there are a lot of different things we could have said here, right? But one thing that I'm sure a lot of you guys said was we have to remember to use quotation marks, right? We have to use quotation marks to show when we are quoting someone and using their exact words. And as you can see, before and after the quote, we have those quotation marks. Okay. Another thing that many people might have mentioned is you have to start before your quote, you have to say something like somebody said something or somebody, explain something or whatever. We've got a little bit of that there. Okay. We also have right here what's called a citation, which is probably a new concept for many of you. We'll talk about what that means. What would you guess that number is? It's the page number that you find that quote in the book. Okay. And there are a lot of other things that you can do to make an effective quote, but we're going to use an approach today that is called the I.C.E. approach. If you think about a quote is basically having three parts that start with I.C.E., it's going to be a lot easier to do good quotes and use quotes well in your writing. So basically, what we're going to look at today is three specific parts of a quote. And you're going to be making notes about these three parts that looks kind of like this. We call this the quote sandwich because as you can see, there's a nice little three-part pattern. Top bread, filling, bottom bread. The three parts that we're talking about today are introducing our topic or a quote idea, giving the quote and citing it, which means giving credit. We'll talk more about that. And explaining the quote and its importance. I.C.E. So a good quoted paragraph, or like using a quote in a paragraph, it's going to have all three of these parts, and it's going to follow that order. And anytime we are doing a good job with giving a quote inside of a paragraph, we're probably going to be using all three of these parts. I've actually color-coded here the top part of my quote, the citing part, and the explaining part. And we're going to see today how anytime you use a quote well, you're going to have these three parts. Giant pencil. Okay, it's time to take some notes. So you are going to need to get a piece of notebook paper, or if you're wanting to do this electronically, you can make a Google Doc with 3 boxes in it, however you want, okay? And you are going to fill up your entire page with 3 boxes, okay? If you're doing this with notebook paper, make sure you actually fill up the whole page with the 3 boxes. And if you're a distance learner, you can use the Google Doc version. That's totally fine. When you're ready, unpause this video and we'll continue forward. Okay, so here's a quick preview of what your notes are going to look like when they're done. We're going to have a fair amount of information and examples here, but we're going to take it step by step. And there are only 3 parts that we're even taking notes on today. Okay, here we go. Part number 1 is to give a topic sentence and introduce your quote. So, first of all, go ahead and take a moment and write that first bit in the top part of your bun. Introduce the topic and the quote idea. I put a dotted line inside of this top part of the bun because as we saw in the earlier finished example, we're breaking it down into 2 parts. So that's the first thing we do when we are giving a quote. We've always got to introduce the topic. You don't just randomly walk up to someone and start spewing out quotes, right? They need to understand why this quote is important or what it's a part of, right? So we'll see an example of that on the one I did in just a sec. After we introduce the topic, this is the next thing you need to write down in your notes. We're going to give what's called, by many people, a signal phrase. Okay, so a signal phrase is that word or that phrase that shows that you're going to give a quote. So we got a lot of different ones here, and you need to write them all down. So take a moment, pause the video, and write down all of these. I will also read them out loud before the video pauses, okay? On the left side, we have according to, according to Elie Wiesel, blah, 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 something he said. In the blank part of the book or article, like on page 57 of this book, it says this, right? In the opinion of so-and-so, the author name. Or you can also use a lot of other words besides just saying they said, right? It gets boring if we always say he said this, he said this. So we can say the author comments and then give a quote. The author explains that, give the quote. The author notes, give the quote. Points out that, remarks, states that, writes. Notice that some of these have commas before them, right? The word comments, you put a comma. So-and-so comments, right? So-and-so notes, so-and-so writes. Okay, you take a little breath before you do it. But if you have the word that before your quote, notice these guys do not have commas after them, right? If I say someone said that, so blah, 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 I don't need to pause. I'm not going to be like, my mom said that. Dogs are nice. What? No, that's weird, right? So, okay, anyway, the video is going to pause. Write down everything you see here. Great, got it down. So here's an example of those parts in action back on our example paragraph from earlier, right? First of all, state your topic. In this case, the reason why I shared this quote was because it had to do with the topic of why talk about the Holocaust, or why did Elie Wiesel write Night? That's my topic. Okay? And then I also said one reason could be to help stop something like the Holocaust from happening again, right? That's part of the topic, right? And then I introduced my quote. So I just used the really basic signal phrase of said. Mr. Wiesel once said, blah, 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 blah. Then you give the quote, right? So this is all going to be in one paragraph when we're done, but we're thinking about it in 3 chunks. And this is the first chunk. If we make sure we do that, it sounds a lot more interesting and fluid, like we lead into the quote instead of just, here's a quote. All right. Next part that we're going to take notes on, and this is the part where it might be new information for a lot of students, okay? We are going to give the quote and cite it. Cite is a word that many students find brand new, okay? If you want to write this underneath it in your notes, okay, after you copy down what you see on the screen, you can write underneath that cite means to give credit, okay? You have to say where it came from. You don't just say a bunch of quotes and never give credit to the source, okay? So go ahead and take a moment to write down that this is the middle part of your sandwich, to give a quote and cite it. That means giving credit to the author, okay? So we're going to write notes about 2 different types of quotes that we can do, or one of them is not really a quote, but it is citing, okay? The first is what we call a direct quote. That is when you use the exact words from a source. So write that down, okay? And we will always use quotation marks to show that the words are copied exactly. Just like in the example we saw, right? When we said, I have tried to keep memory alive. That was not my words. Those were the exact words that Mr. Wiesel said in the exact order he said them. So we use quotation marks. Whoops. We use quotation marks before and after that quote, right? That's how we show that it is a direct quote. Now, the second type of credit that we can do is what's called a paraphrase. Okay, so write this on the other side of your little box or underneath or whatever if you ran out of space normally, okay? So paraphrase is where we take an idea from the author, but we put it into your own words. You do this all the time, right? If your mom says, I need you to go tell your brother to take out the trash, you don't go to your brother and say, tell your brother to take out the trash. You say, Mom said, go take out the trash, right? So when we paraphrase, we do not use quotation marks, right? We're not quoting their exact words anymore. We only use quotation marks when it is the person's exact words. So here's an example of that. Ellie said that he has tried to make people remember. That's what it would happen if I took this quote over here, but instead of trying to share the exact words, I just paraphrased, right? So that's how that looks. But there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that is, what on earth is this thing coming after the quote and coming after the paraphrase, right? That is the last thing we're going to put in this box in the middle of our sandwich. So that's why we still have a little room left at the bottom. So the last thing that we need to do is do what is called an in-text citation, okay? That is where we put the author's name in parentheses at the end of the quote sentence, okay? That's what we did in these examples, right? We've got our author's name, which is Wiesel, that's his last name. We put it in these guys, the parentheses, and we put it at the end of the sentence where the quote happened, right? Now, there is a special rule that you should write down. If you say the author's name already, you don't have to put the last name again. You can just put a page number, right? So like in the second example, if I, instead of saying Ellie said, if I said Ellie Wiesel said or Mr. Wiesel said, I'm just going to put a W for Wiesel, then I wouldn't have to say it down here. I could say, Mr. Wiesel said that he has tried to make people remember page 118. Okay? But that is how we are going to be giving credit for our sources in English class after, well, it's one of the two parts of giving credit for the source. After we have given the quote, we're going to put these little parentheses, and inside of that, we're going to put the citation, or cite is the other way of saying that. We're going to cite, and then we put a period after the quotation marks. That period is our signal, hey, I just finished giving credit. Boom, I'm done. The next sentence is not going to be from the source. It's going to be some other thing. Okay, that's kind of a new format for some of you. Some of you guys are more used to doing maybe like what's called footnotes, right? Where you put like a number and then you have like a number at the bottom. This is just another way of doing it, but it is the way that you are expected to do it for English class in high school and for any class involving the humanities, which involves like music and art and stuff like that. That won't be so much of an issue in high school for you, but English you have every year. And it's also the way they expect you to do it in college for your English classes. So that's how we're going to do that, right? So just to recap everything we just saw on this slide, right? We introduced our quote already. This middle part is to give the quote in one of these two ways, either as a direct quote or a paraphrase. Then you're going to cite it by putting the author's last name, and if it's a book, the page number. It's actually not that many parts. It seemed like a lot, but it's not that many parts. So that is the C in our ice cream sandwich. I for introduce, C for cite. And as you can see in our example, that's exactly what was happening right here, right? I introduced my quote. Now I have given the quote, which was a direct quote, so I have my quotation marks, and I cited the page number. In this case, because I said Mr. Wiesel, I just put the page number. I did not put his last name again. Okay, we have one more part to our ice cream sandwich, our I.C.E. quotes. And this one is very similar to the analysis skill that you've already used with your argument writing. In fact, it is actually the same thing, right? So our final part is going to be explaining or analyzing. They kind of mean the same thing. And it says here, make a big bottom. When you've had an ice cream sandwich, it's really gross if the bottom gets soggy and like turns to mush and the ice cream starts melting onto your hands, right? You want a big bottom on your ice cream sandwich. And similarly, okay, when you are sharing a quote from an argument paper or a research paper or a video or whatever, people don't just want to hear a bunch of quotes. Like the quotes are important to get your point across, right? You need something in the middle of your sandwich. But in this case, the most important part is actually going to be that bottom. Okay, so think of it like an ice cream sandwich or else this this example falls apart, right? We want to see a lot of your thoughts and your ideas about that quote or why that quote is important. So that's going to be our third part we take notes on. Okay, so this is what we're going to write in our notes for the bottom of our sandwich, part 3, the E. Explain the quote. And please do add analysis as another way of saying that afterwards, because they're the same thing, okay? So this is where you are going to clarify difficult parts of the quote. Were there any vocabulary words that somebody might not get, or any ideas that would be hard for someone to understand if they hadn't read the whole thing like you did? This is a good time to explain that. You can share your interpretation or your reaction to the quote, which is what I did in the example we'll see again in a moment. You can explain how the quote proves your point, and you can describe what the quote reveals, right? Different people have different analysis of the same information, just like we saw with the murder mystery activities that we did last quarter. Not everybody looks at some information and thinks the same thing. So this is your chance to share your thoughts and your ideas. And that's why explaining the quote is so important. I've actually heard a tip from people that when you explain a quote, it should actually be like twice as long as the quote itself. Okay, so think about this like a really fat bottom of an ice cream sandwich. That's why we say we want to make a big bottom, right? I don't read your research essay or your argument essay or your pamphlet or your video or whatever because I want to see a bunch of quotes. The quotes are important, but what is most interesting to me is what do you have to add? When you make this video or you make this essay or you make this whatever, your explaining is going to be completely different from the next guy because you're not going to look at it the same. And so that's the most interesting part to read for a reader. We're also going to add to the bottom of our notes some basic phrases that you can use in analysis, okay? So please take a sec and write down all 4 of these different phrases. As you can see from this information, see how that sounds like something you'd use to lead into your explaining? This means, this suggests, this is important because, there are other ways to do it too, but those are 4 very good ways to follow up your quote with some explaining. So take a sec, write those down. So when we go back to that analysis example, you'll see, look how much bigger my bottom is than my quote was, right? My quote was just this little 3-line section here, but my explaining / analyzing is huge, right? So after I said that Elie Wiesel wants to fight those who would forget, okay, so what does it mean to forget? What does it mean to fight, right? That's why I decided to start, is explaining what does he mean by fight. By calling what he does a fight, Wiesel could mean that many people want to just forget the Holocaust. It can feel like fighting to speak about what happened, but it is important to keep talking about this sad history so we do not ever repeat it, right? So I followed up my one sentence quote, with 2 sentences explaining the quote, what does it mean to fight? And then 1 other sentence about, okay, cool, why is this information important? I don't want to waste your time here, right? So why is this quote important? I'm showing that to my reader. All right, so our notes should be done. If you needed to pause or go back to a part to write down stuff, please do that. Okay, just to review, we've seen that anytime we quote information from a source, there are 3 basic things we should do. And we can use the memory trick I.C.E. or ice cream sandwich to remember the 3 parts. Introduce your topic with the signal phrase. Give your quote and cite it, which means to give credit. And then explain the quote. That's your analysis. That is the most interesting part, in my opinion. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a quick teacher example if you feel like you still need more help understanding this concept. Okay, so for this example, I asked my teacher friend, Mr. Moeller, to come up with a quote from the book Night, and he chose a doozy for me. But you know what? I'm gonna go with it. We're gonna see how this goes. So let me get my pencil ready here. Okay. The quote says, "I began to think of myself again. My foot was aching. I shivered with every step. Just a few more meters and it will be over." If you can't tell already, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but this is from the part where Eli was being forced to march at gunpoint in the snow, and if prisoners were too slow, they would get shot. A very intense part of the book. And here he's thinking about the idea of dying, and in a way he's not scared of it anymore because he's tired of being tired and cold and everything. It's kind of, woof. Yeah, I guess that's going to be part of my explaining. I just started to explain it already, right? But yeah, let's go ahead and I'm going to come up with, if I was writing an essay, for example, about the Holocaust, or one about Elie Wiesel, or if I was preparing a script for a movie about him or something like that, I'm assuming that this quote would be shared for a specific reason, right? So like normally you won't just have people throw quotes at you. You get to pick the quotes. I'm going to imagine I'm Mr. Mueller here. I'm guessing he picked this one to show just how like traumatized and tired the prisoners were after having marched for almost 12 miles in the snow. Remember that? It was almost 12 miles. Okay. So, first of all, I got to introduce this topic. Not exactly sure how I want to go about that. I think I will say something like, give me a sec. Oh, I know. Okay. I'm going to use this quote as a proof of some of the horrible things the Nazis were doing, right? Not just that they affected people physically, but they affected people like mentally and emotionally and really messed up a lot of the people. So I'm going to start, I think I'm going to say the Nazis not only tortured their prisoners physically. Yeah, okay. Tortured their prisoners physically, but also mentally. Okay, so that is the first part of my I for introduce. Okay, now the other thing I have to do you remember what is the second thing I need to do? If you do, answer right now. If you don't, check your notes and answer right now. I need to use a signal phrase. That's right. I can't just say, here's a quote. I got to give the quote. So maybe I'll say something like, I think I'm going to give a signal phrase by introducing the situation because I haven't said that yet, that they're marching through the snow. So I think I'm going to say, when he was forced to march in the snow, maybe I'll say 12 miles. I like specific details. When he forced to march 12 miles in the snow, and then I need to pick one of those signal phrases. I think I'm going to say Eli describes. I like the word describes. And there's a lot of different ways I could do this. I could put the word that and then just start the quote. I think I'm going to actually use a colon, which is another good thing you can do before quotes. Eli describes his experience. And then I'm going to put these colons. Okay. So there we go. That's the first part of my I of the ice cream sandwich. Next part is the C. C for what? For cite, right? I'm going to give credit. So I already have my quote here, but one thing I do not have yet is quotation marks, which I need to use because it's a direct quote, right? Okay. And then as far as citing this goes, I need to say the author's last name if I haven't said that, and I have not said that. And I need to say the page number, which for convenience, like I put up here just to help you out. Okay, so in this case, we're going to put after the quote, the parenthesis, Wiesel 86. You don't have to say page. It's just the weird rules. Okay, you just have to say the number. Closing parenthesis, put a period. I would actually get rid of this period here because technically my sentence is not over with the quote until I have given credit for the quote. Okay, so there we go. Now the C is perfect. I've introduced my quote. I've said my quote and cited it. Okay, the last part is the explaining. Okay, I'm not going to make you sit and watch in the video me write the whole thing. So I'm going to just pause recording, and after I finish recording, I'll unpause. Okay, here we go. This is what I came up with on the fly, just like off the cuff. Okay. So I started to use this quote shows as my like explaining beginning phrase. Okay. This quote shows how the Nazis had damaged not only prisoners' physical bodies, but also their spirits. Since Eli was so desensitized to seeing people die, he wasn't afraid of being shot by the Nazis. So that's my, this is what this quote means part, right? Then I also decided to say, this is why this quote is important, right? I actually changed the color I was writing in just to make that even more obvious that I did an extra thing in here. This is some concerning proof that survivors of the Nazis regime still dealt with mental problems. So you see what I did there, right? I explained my quote. I explained it, the context, especially for someone who might not have read it before. but then I also took some time to share my own reaction or my own thoughts about why this quote was important. And there we go, right? That's an example of using all three parts of the quote sandwich to build a paragraph around a quote to make some kind of point or learn something from the quote. Now, the next part of this assignment, I'm going to leave what I wrote up for a second. It says, let's do a quote together. So in-person students are going to be coming up with a quote with me, and we're going to do a bit of back and forth. But since this video is designed so that you can just watch the video anytime you want, you don't have to call me up at like 10 p.m. or whenever you're watching this video, right? I'm going to go ahead and actually let you use this first example as the first half of your worksheet, right? Because the worksheet has a do together part and the worksheet has a do by yourself part. So you can actually, if you like this quote, I guess, you can actually copy this down for your first of the two quote practices. And if you hate it, then you can come up with your own and just do two on your own, okay? But yeah, I think it would be easier to do this. So I'm gonna let the video pause here and you can write down what you need, okay? All right, so now that you have done that, let's go ahead and do the final part of this assignment. Oh yes, but there is one thing that we need to do either way, okay? So I said that you could go ahead and you could use my quote as your quote sandwich over here in these boxes, right? That is totally fine to do, okay? But there is another part that I forgot when I was giving those instructions. Now that we've written our quote, we don't normally write quotes in little like ice cream sandwich themed boxes, right? We just write them out as a normal paragraph. So let's actually practice doing that over here, okay? You're literally just gonna take the exact same words from here, but you're gonna write it all out as one normal paragraph where you indent at the beginning and start writing here and just go, 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 go till you're done, okay? Do that. I'm assuming you paused and did that, okay? So the last part we need to do, this is something that's a little newish, okay? We're gonna learn more about this on another day, but we're gonna start doing something called a works cited. Bibliography is another word that you can use for that. After our quote that we used in our essay or a movie script or whatever it is that we're using the quote in, we also need to give credit for the source, right? Because if we just say at the end, if we just say Weasel, I already forgot what page it was. I'm just gonna pretend it was on page 110, okay? If we just say that, if somebody hasn't read the book Night, they're not going to know what the heck Weasel means. They're going to be like, Weasel? What does that mean, right? So we're going to give some basic information at the bottom of the essay, bottom of the page, bottom of the script, bottom of the whatever that tells people how to find this source, okay? Today, we're just going to do the following. We're going to list the full name of the author with the last name first, the name of the website or book. It's a book, okay? When was it written? We're just going to stick to that. We're going to keep it really basic, okay? So the name of our author is Elie Wiesel. We're going to write Wiesel, comma, Elie, because when you organize things by name, you do it by last name, right? That's how the school organizes things when they organize by name. Then we're going to say the name of the book, which is just Night, okay? Normally, if you are writing the name of a book, you're supposed to italicize with that, like, the slanty, leany writing. I have a hard time doing that by hand, so the rule is when you're doing it by hand, you can also underline it to show that, okay? And the last thing is the date that it was published, which I'm going to be honest, I don't remember. So Night Wiesel publication year. I'm just going to look it up. It's in your book. Like if you open up your book, you will see inside the year it was published. 1956. Wow. Okay. I feel like the version that you have is probably published sooner than that. So if you actually have the Night book on you, take a look at in those first few pages. They'll say what year and you can put that year. But you know what? I'm just going to put 1956 because I don't want you to wait for me to pull up the ebook and painstakingly look through the pages. And I know that there is a version of the book that was published in 1956. There we go, right? So this would be a way for somebody after reading your essay, story, movie script, whatever, that has your quote, they can look at the bottom and be like, oh, I want to read more from that Wiesel guy. And they're like, oh, okay. So his name is Elie Wiesel, and the book is called Night, and it was published in 1956, right? That is almost all the information they would need to find the book anywhere. And we'll learn a more detailed version of this works cited thing later, but that's what we're going to do for today, is just write out the basics about where do we find this book, who's it by, etc. Okay? Awesome. So the final part of the assignment is to do this same thing again, but now with a different quote from the book Night that you have found. And to be honest, like if you don't want to use Night and you have another book lying around, you can use another book. I just want to see you practice quotation skills, okay? The benefit of using Night again, besides the fact that you just read it and probably remember things from it, is this works cited part is going to be exactly the same for the second one, because all you're saying is the author, the book, and the year. And that is the same because you're using the same book, okay? So go ahead and find any quote that you want in the book Night. If you're not sure what you want to use as a quote, there are some interesting quotes on pages 110 to 111, which is that part where that guy tells him he should abandon his dad, and he was like, what? Okay. And pages 118 to 119, that's the speech at the end of the book that Eli gave when he won the Nobel Peace Prize for writing this book. And he says some really cool quotes in there about like how we need to defend people and we need to help people who are in danger and stuff like that. So those are some great parts. If there is another specific part that you want to quote in the book and you can't remember where it is, like you're like, I want to quote the part where that dentist tried to take out his gold tooth, or I want to quote from the part where he's doing the selection and he has to run really fast because if he doesn't run fast enough, they'll kill him or whatever, right? Then you can ask me. I know the book pretty well, and I can send you a Canvas message back and tell you where that part is. But honestly, like literally any part works. Just flip through the book for a few pages, find something interesting that somebody said or did, and then build a quote around it, whatever point you're trying to share. I think a really easy topic, if you're not sure what you're going to do for the top part of the sandwich, whoops, I was drawing. I thought I was drawing. If you're not sure what you're going to do for the top part of your sandwich to introduce it, the horrors of the Holocaust, right? There are so many quotes in Night that can show what a horrible experience the Holocaust was and why it should never happen again. That sounds like maybe a reason why the quote could be important, right? Just giving you some suggestions, okay? But I look forward to seeing your quotation skills. Remember, by the time you're done, you're going to have a paragraph. Well, first it's in the quote boxes, and then it's a paragraph that looks more or less like this kind of stuff. Same format, I.C.E., introduce, cite, explain. You don't need to color code it, though. Unless that helps you. If you're doing it on the computer and you want to color code it, be my guest. Look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Thanks for watching this video lesson, and send me a Canvas message with any questions you have. Thanks.